Hello, BookTube. Welcome back to Can You Forgive Steve Donoghue? our April read-along of Anthony Trollope's 1865 novel, Can You Forgive Her? The first of his Palliser novels, uh, in which, week by week, we go through the book, 20 chapters a week, and this is our second one, so we're starting off with the chapter, Alice is taught to grow upwards towards the light, and we're reading straight through to what was the end of the first volume that readers in Victorian London would have been able to buy in bookstores, which is the chapter Mrs. Greenow's Little Dinner in the Close. And to bring us up to speed just a bit on the plot, the book revolves around the fates of three women who are roughly contemporaneous in age and who are all connected, roughly, in a circuitous way, to the same group of families. The first is Alice Vavasour, who is the her in the title, Can You Forgive Her, who was peacefully, matter-of-factly, placidly engaged to a worthy gentleman named John Gray, and takes it into her head, for no clearly defined reason, that she would not make him happy, as she puts it, that he's too calm, too respectable, and since he doesn't maintain an establishment in London, since he lives only in the country, she envisions a life for herself in which she disappears, in which she crawls early into a tomb of respectability in the country and never emerges again to make anything of her life, to, in a phrase that occurs over and over in this book, do something with her life. She envisions an end to all that, and she isn't sure what she wants to do with her life anyway, but she knows that once she becomes John Gray's dutiful wife and the mother of his children, any hope of that will be gone. He's not oppressive at all. It's just he is a completely by-the-numbers, completely ordinary, completely conventional man, a respectable property owner, who doesn't even have ambitions to politics. Whereas she feels something burning inside her. She can't put a name to it. She's a little bit leery of the radical feminists who are starting to make waves in her day asking for the vote. She's a little bit uncomprehending about radical politics and parliament, but she knows something. She feels something. And she is egged on in that by her cousin Kate, who is the sister of George Vavasour, her first cousin, who once upon a time held a place of affection in Alice's heart. They were once an item. And their relationship was sundered, and she allowed herself to be engaged to John Gray. And in the first 20 chapters that we read last week, she breaks that engagement. She jilts him. She jilts John Gray. She tells him, I'm afraid I have to call it off. And it's a wonderful scene where he immediately assumes that she's not right in the head. He immediately tells her, well, you're just sick. That's all. Take some time out of London, get away from the city, get away from all of these thoughts of yours, and you'll be fine. And not only other characters, but the narrator himself, which we can conventionally assign to be Trollope. I'm never comfortable with that completely, but one way or another, there's a narrative voice that runs throughout this book. We aren't just impersonally told things. We're told a story by a person who has an I. He has an individual personal pronoun. And not only other characters, but he himself, that narrator himself, says that too much thought is probably bad for an engagement. And the first 20 chapters that we read detail a bit of the complete chaos caused by Alice's decision to jilt John Gray. Her distant, disaffected, somewhat peevish father with whom she lives, but under whose control she's never been, because her fortune of £8,000 is her own. It was given to her. It's legally enjoined to her. He can't touch it. So, and it never really occurs to him to exercise parental authority in non-monetary means. So he's just sort of a lodger in his own home, and they pass like ships in the night. But he thinks she's insane to jilt John Gray, and worries that she is leaning towards resuming a relationship with her cousin George, who nobody likes, to put it mildly. Nobody likes him. Trollope makes sure, he goes out of his way to tell us that George Vavasour has a huge scar running down the length of his face, and that when he's angry or upset, his face becomes, as Trollope puts it, all scar. But Trollope also makes it clear that he could be as handsome as Adonis, and he would still be a repulsive figure. Nobody knows anything about his dealings. Nobody knows where he gets his money. Nobody knows where he spends his free time. Nobody ever hears him talk except in his own advancement. We're told that he has a place in the country, that he has a small, mysterious lodgings in the city, and we're told there's one other place. So one line in the first 20 chapters that we read. We're told there's one other place that concerns him, one other location that involves him, and where the narrator immediately tells us that we don't need to know anything about it now. You learn it later on. You learn it later on in the book, but not in the first 20 chapters and not in the 20 chapters we're reading today. And the second woman is Kate's Aunt Greenough, Arabella Greenough, who married a man who was 2 or 3 times her age, who was very wealthy. He promptly died, and now she is the stereotypical Victorian, extremely wealthy widow who wears widow's weeds and does all sorts of ostentatious mourning, but is essentially on the lookout for another man. And her adventures at the seaside and elsewhere with 2 potential suitors, Mr. Cheeseacre, a prosperous farmer who is an absolute dolt, and one of Trollope's great comic creations, and Captain Belfield, a charismatic wastrel liar who doesn't own, as we're told, the coat that he wears. It pleases Aunt Greenough, as we call her. We never call her Arabella. We call her Aunt Greenough, even though the text makes it clear she's not that old. It pleases her to deal with these men. It pleases her to be the center of their attention. And her subplot is largely done for comic effect, and I think very good comic effect. I've been amazed in my rereading of this book for this read-along how much the Aunt Greenough chapters make me smile. And the third woman that we were introduced to in the first 3 chapters that we meet is Glencora Mccluskey, a child of the gold mines, a child of an enormous amount of money, who falls in love head over heels with a gorgeous young man named Burgo Fitzgerald, who is the nephew of one of the great movers and shakers in the noble family, Lady Midlothian, and who is a spendthrift and a wastrel and good-natured, but in an idle kind of way. People despair of him. They don't dislike him. He's perfectly likable, gracious to children, we're told, but never thought of earning money, and has long since burned through the money that he got upon coming of age. In other words, a disastrous potential husband for an heiress with such money behind her, because in Victorian law, her money would become his almost entirely. And the families get together to arrange a marriage between Glencora Mccluskey and Plantagenet Palliser, the nephew and heir of the Duke of Omnium, one of the highest titles in the land. Plantagenet Palliser is already wealthy and will become staggeringly wealthy and powerful when he becomes the Duke of Omnium. And he himself is a stick. He's a drip. He likes to study coinage and finance, and is viewed by all the political men in the book as a rising star in the political establishment and likely to become Chancellor of the Exchequer. Totally at odds with Glencora's personality, which is fiery and flighty and impetuous and funny. Glencora is an amazing creation. In my opinion, she far outshines Aunt Greenough and Alice Vavasour and any other character that Trollope ever made. Almost. I can only think of one, and that character is also a woman and doesn't appear anywhere in the Palliser novels. But one way or another, Glencora agrees. Unlike Alice Vavasour, who has no pressure on her except distantly from relatives she's never even met, who approve of her engagement to John Grey, and one of those relatives, at the dictation of Lady Midlothian, writes her a great letter. Trollope's letters are always great, expressing pious and smothering family dismay over the fact that she has broken her engagement with John Grey and may be considering taking up George Vavasour again. Unlike Alice, Glencora agrees to abandon her her love affair and marry Plantagenet Palliser, even though there's no love there. And really, the first 20 chapters sort of set all that up. That's really what the purpose of the first 20 chapters is. They're really, really good reading, in my opinion. Nobody builds a world like Trollope. They're amazing. By the time you're finished with those first 20 chapters, you are fully in the swing of this now completely alien world. And when we start off our next batch of chapters, our next 20 chapters, Alice Vavasour has received an invitation from Glencora Palliser to visit the Pallisers' country estate of Matching Priory. And Alice at first is dismayed and writes that she couldn't possibly do that because she can't bear the thought of encountering Lady Midlothian and getting lectured in person about what she's done to John Grey. And Glencora assures her that Lady Midlothian will not be there, that none of that set will be there at Matching Priory. So Alice agrees. She talks about it with her father, but of course he can't say one way or another. She is her own master. So she agrees to go to Matching Priory. And then we get our next 20 chapters, which starts with, as I mentioned, starts with a chapter called Alice is Taught to Grow Upwards Towards the Light. That is a reference to a comment that her father makes, one of the most philosophical and poetical comments that her father makes in the whole course of the book, where he's essentially trying to tell her that only good can come from her getting to know her extremely wealthy and powerful family members. She's so far avoided that. But he's trying to tell her, going to their homes, meeting the people they know, getting to know this much higher rung of society. They have no use for John Vavasour himself, but they might have use for her. And that getting to know them can only be good for her if she will only learn, like a plant, to grow upwards towards the sunlight. And she's skeptical about that. But as the 20 chapters that we're reading now begin, she goes to Matching Priory, which we're told is just a house. But of course, that underscores something that I want to talk about in this little discussion, which an enormous chunk of our 20 chapters this time around takes place at Matching Priory. 8 chapters out of 20 take place at Matching Priory, which we're told is just a house, but it's actually obviously a fairly lavish mansion. And it also has on its grounds ruins of an old church that are very picturesque, even in the middle of the heart of winter, which is when this visit takes place. And Alice agrees to go. And therefore, 2 of our main female characters are brought together for a long period of time. And it's pretty clear from the minute that Alice gets to Matching Station that Lady Glencora is going to adopt her as a close personal friend. She needs a confidant. There's no one at Matching Priory for her to talk to. It's a big house, it's austere, and it's full of Pallisers. It's full of her husband's people. One of the damning details, of course, being on BookTube, of course I noticed, with extra emphasis this time around, is that the narrator snidely tells us that the house may contain a well-appointed library, but no one remembers how to get there. These are not readers. Although the 2 Palliser girls, two girls attached to the family, noble families like this always have girls flitting about waiting for husbands or trying to make themselves useful in some other way. They're a staple of this kind of writing that extends all the way to Brideshead Revisited. And they're Iphigenia and Euphemia, Iphie and Euphemia Palliser. And they may not be intellectuals, but they're great letter writers. They love writing letters. One of the other Pallisers there is Geoffrey Palliser, who is the son of the brother of the old Duke, and was much favored. He has a much greater personality than his cousin Plantagenet. But he has £600 a year. His family, he's not an heir to anything, unless Plantagenet and Glencora do not produce an heir, in which case the dukedom of Omnium goes to him. But they're young and they're only freshly married, so he has no right to expect anything. And the family has only settled £600 on him, and as Trollope tells us, they've not only given him £600 a year, they've also given him a taste for living with people who have 6,000. And that's ruinous, and he knows it. Alice Vavasour has some money of her own, and it's pretty clear early on that Lady Glencora would like to matchmake. She would like it if Alice Vavasour joined her family by falling in love with Geoffrey Palliser. And there's some great dialogue. In fact, in the Matching Priory scenes here, we get long stretches that are only dialogue. And when I was rereading it this time around, I was realizing how good Trollope is at that. He's so good at it that you don't even realize that it's been pages that you've been reading only dialogue without a single other thing. It shows Trollope originally had great hopes of making it on the stage, of being a playwright instead of a novelist. He hoped to do well there, and he's known for his long, stodgy, descriptive passages, but he's an ace at dialogue. Absolutely fantastic. There is absolutely no way in one of his long stretches of only dialogue that you would ever mix up who's speaking. Everybody has their own way of speaking. And while Alice Vavasour is staying at Matching Priory, two big things happen, aside from the flirting with Geoffrey Palliser. He is very candid. He's very likable. They get along, and circumstances in the household throw them together quite a bit. She's resistant. She isn't. It's been too soon since she gave up John Grey, and she's still on tenterhooks about her cousin George, so she has no idea what to do, certainly isn't going to fall into the arms of someone who's being thrust upon her. But at Matching Priory, two big things happen. In the course of the time we spend there, we meet a whole bunch of characters, including some male characters. We meet Plantagenet Palliser. We meet the Duke of St. Bungay, who will be all through the Palliser novels. He's a old-style machine politician. He's been in many ministries. He's always there. He knows politics backwards and forwards. He has no passion and takes politics purely as a business. And then there's an odious political creature named Mr. Bott, who's always present, and he's always rubbing his hands as if he were about to say something, but then not saying anything. And he loves to wheedle. He loves to control. He's the kind of repulsive political figure that Trollope does really well. He obviously reserves a special kind of contempt for them. And there are a couple of them that appear later in the Palliser series and just recur from book to book, and they're thoroughly odious, just awful. But Mr. Bott is pretty bad on his own. But while all of that is going on, and we're getting the political impressions of the world that Plantagenet Palliser is hoping to enter and ascend, two big things happen. The first one is a wonderful set piece that Trollope gives us, where Glencora urges Alice to take a walk with her around the ruins under bright, full moonlight, even though it's the middle of winter and there's a hard frost, even though they'll be freezing cold. And they do. Geoffrey Palliser goes with them only as far as the gate of the ruins, and then they walk around the ruins alone, under the bright moonlight. And Glencora confesses that she's still passionately in love with Burgo Fitzgerald, and would leave her husband for him. And Alice is astounded, just appalled. You shouldn't even talk that way, much less think about this. Glencora is talking about how, well, yes, Burgo Fitzgerald might burn through a lot of her money, but maybe not all of it before she changed his nature. And that if she goes to live with him, Plantagenet Palliser would have no choice but to divorce her. And that would be better for everybody because Glencora is beating herself up over the fact that she still isn't pregnant with an heir. And she seems to believe that everybody at Matching Priory has noticed and that they think poorly of her because of it. And she's in a wretched, horrible state, and she confesses all of this during this promenade in the ruins at night. And when they get back, of course, they're bone-chilled, freezing cold, and Plantagenet Palliser is angry at Alice Vavasour. But before that happens, another major thing happens in these 20 chapters, which is that unbeknownst to Lady Glencora, totally unplanned by her, Lady Midlothian actually does come to Matching Priory. She comes out of her way on her way to London. She comes out of her way to be a guest of the Pallisers, and actually does have a confrontation with Alice Vavasour, and it is strangely muted. It isn't at all what a similar scene would be in 20th century fiction. But still, the gloves are off. It's bare knuckle in both directions. It's pretty clear that Alice doesn't want the favor of this woman, and it's pretty clear that this woman is not going to give up. So there's a great deal of relationship tension when Alice Vavasour finally leaves Matching Priory and wishes that she'd never gone in the first place, that no good came of her inclining upward toward the light. And something changes in her mind. Something about seeing the torment of Lady Glencora changes her disposition towards her own situation. Because in the following chapters, her cousin George re-proposes marriage to her, and she agrees. Even though she doesn't love him, even though she doesn't like him, even though she finds him physically repulsive. She shrinks bodily from the idea of even kissing him. All she's thinking about is that to redeem herself for her mistake with jilting John Grey, she will use her money to finance his bid for Parliament. And it's pretty clear that she knows what he knows but has not told her, which is that's all he really wants. Her father is completely appalled by this plan, just amazed by it, especially when she tells him that if her cousin George wants her money before he marries her, he's perfectly free to have it. Not even the security of marriage, just giving him money when her father and John Grey, once he learns of it, are certain that the minute George Vavasour has the money, he won't care about the marriage. In other words, our picture of him gets worse and worse as these chapters go on. Now, the 20 chapters that we're reading here end with the same way that our last 20 chapters did. They end on a high note. They end on a comic note. We return to Aunt Greenow. We return to more adventures with Mr. Cheeseacre and Captain Palefield. And it is very funny, and it is very diverting, and it ends the 20 chapters that we're doing this time around with a plan afoot. I mean, the comic subplot is fine, but by this point in the novel, I don't think anyone's paying much attention to it. They are now fully invested in what's going to happen to Alice Vavasour, and I would imagine maddened by her behavior. Because there's no reason for her to be acting the way she is. John Grey goes to visit her and says, "Can this possibly be true? That you're thinking about marrying this man? Have you set a date? Can you give me a reason?" And in the course of their conversation, it becomes clear to him that what George Vavasour wants from his cousin is her money. And he comes up with a plan, which is to save her from him. He will raise the money and buy George Vavasour off. And we get a scene where he goes with Alice's father to his lawyer to set that in motion. They are certain that they know their man. They are certain that if they offer him the money, he'll take it and drop the whole idea of marrying Alice, which will free her after a time when her mind is cleared and she sees things clearly and has gotten over this weird self-castigation. It will free her to marry John Grey, who tells her, "I still love you every bit as much as I did before." In that scene, I fully believe that in that scene, there's not a single reader anywhere in the last 150 years who isn't wondering why she doesn't just change her mind right there in the room. Why does the book need to go on? Why doesn't she just say, "Oh, well, if you still love me the same as you did, let's just agree that I was out of my mind, and we'll say no more about it. I will write to my cousin George and say, I've thought better of it, and I don't want to do this. I'm going to resume my relationship with John Grey." The world largely doesn't. The outside world largely doesn't know that it was even off. That scene should be the end of the book, and instead it's going to go on for 500 more pages. But that's where our 20 chapters end this time around. Things are at a much greater heat, a much greater pitch. And before I wrap up the video, I wanted to make a couple of points. One is a response to, actually they're both kind of responses to lots of comments that I got last time. I got a lot of comments, a lot of emails, a lot of texts from people about our last discussion, and people kept going back to a long chapter called Edgehill in the first 20 chapters, which is a fox hunting chapter. That's all that happens in it, is it's the description of a country fox hunt. And the reason that it comes to mind is because there's another fox hunt in the 20 chapters that we read this time, where it's a much, much shorter description, and it's mainly meant to underscore the fact that Burgo Fitzgerald, once he learns that he's not going to have any access to Glencora, that they're not going to meet, he rides like a madman during the next fox hunt. That doesn't care for his own safety. The implication is that he would be happy if he fell and broke his neck. But a lot of people wrote about that fox hunting chapter in the first one, said, why did it go on for so long? It lost me completely. It doesn't seem like part of the story. What's going on here? And there's a good answer to that. But it doesn't have anything to do with the plot of Can You Forgive Her? It has to do with Anthony Trollope. We mentioned last time that by the time Trollope was writing this novel, he was at the height of his fame. He'd written 10 novels. He'd written lots of very popular stuff. He had a huge, what we'd call now a fan base. He got more money for this book than for any other book in his career. He was a household name among fiction readers. And part of that was his knack for really good plots. But another part of it was because he had, by then, some signature Trollope set pieces. He dispenses with them very daringly, one of the major ones in this book, which is that there's nothing ecclesiastical. Nothing at all. We don't get any church politics in this book. But there are a couple of others. And one of them touches on all of those questions that I got. And another one touches on the one observation that I want to make about these 20 chapters that we just read. The first one is fox hunting. I know that's going to sound strange, but Trollope was an avid fox hunter, and by the time he wrote this book, fans knew that he could write a cracking good fox hunting scene. And that's going to seem very strange as a description in the 21st century, but nevertheless, most of you, I'm assuming that most booktubers have never been on a fox hunt and probably deplore the idea of it. I have, and Trollope writes a really good fox hunting scene. And you might think that's easy to do, but it's not. It's not at all. He writes long, thrilling fox hunting scenes, and he doesn't do it just in this book. They are, in other words, they are a Trollope staple. They're a signature. He knows his fans will be waiting for them, and he's not going to disappoint them. So that's why Edgehill was in there as its own chapter. But another thing that's also a signature of Trollope is something that sets him apart, in my mind, very refreshingly from authors like Charles Dickens, which is that he likes to hang around the rich and powerful. He likes to dramatize their lives, their hearts, their troubles, while also giving us glimpses into the appurtenances of their life. Now, that applies to Alice Vavasour. The one thing you might miss when you're reading this book is that she has command of a fairly large amount of money. It's more than most people in Victorian London earned in a year. That she doesn't have to work. In other words, she's idle. She lives off the interest of this massive amount of money that she has in investments. But it's not just her. In fact, she's the least of it. Look at where we go in these 20 chapters. For instance, we go to Matching Priory, which is a grand home. It's nothing like Omnium Gatherum Castle. It's nothing like that. We will get there, and it's 50 times grander. The actual country residence, the family seat of the Duke of Omnium, where we are going, if we were to read the rest of the Palliser novels, you spend a huge amount of time at Gatherum Castle. But still, Matching Priory is impressive. It's a huge amount of grounds. They're driving along the edge of it for a long time before they even notice. And once we're done at Matching Priory, which has liveried servants and carriages of its own and rooms for everybody and huge meals and huge tables and all sorts of stuff like that, and a long family history. There's one great moment where Lady Glencora talks about how she went to the ruins on her own after Alice left and wandered around and imagined that all the Pallisers, going all the way back to Richard the Lionheart, were looking down at her from the empty windows and judging her as not being worthy of the family. We get all of that at Matching Priory. But then we go to Vavasour Hall, the ancestral family seat of Alice's grandfather, the squire of Squire of Vavasour, who it's Vavasour Hall outside the town of Vavasour in the parish of Vavasour. So, she's not exactly a working girl. It's fairly grand. The squire is a wonderful character. He has been lord of his little domain forever. And so his family going back, again, to the Norman Conquest, or even before. And also, we get a brief digression to Monkshade, the home of the Fitzgeralds, one of the homes of the family of Burgo Fitzgerald. And it likewise is full of influential politicians and very wealthy people. That is where we spend most of our time in this book. And that also is not coincidence. Fans of Trollope expected that. And unlike in his Barchester novels, give us a broader spectrum socially, the Palliser novels are very much concerned with the glittering halls of power, wealth, and money, or wealth and influence. And we get a lot of that. And I like it. I love that aspect of it. I think Trollope does it really well. He brings it to life. He makes it human. So that's basically it for my thoughts on these 20 chapters. I have, of course, the usual questions for you. I wish you were all sitting here so I could just ask you as everything that comes to my mind. I, for instance, thought that Alice comes off better in these chapters because we see her under duress. We see her as an underdog at Matching Priory and with her father, and preyed upon even by her own self-doubts later on. And I'm wondering if you felt the same way. A lot of you seem more sympathetic to her than I ever have been. Did you like her more when these chapters were done? And what about Lady Glencora? Of course, I'm a little prejudiced asking about her because I'm making no secret of the fact that I love her dearly. She's one of my favorite fictional characters. And what do you make of her situation when you see her contemplating leaving her proper arranged marriage to marry a beautiful wastrel? What do you think of that? Do you think she would make a go of it? Does it seem like madness in the way that I'm assuming in these 20 chapters you have all come around to thinking that Alice marrying her cousin George is madness? But does it seem that way to you? And what did you make of all the money? What did you make? Did you even notice that you were among the halls of the powerful? That, for instance, Captain Belfield is you and me, right? We're told that he has a full-time job, that he works all day long, that he's very tired at the end of his day, and we're told that he owes a lot of credit, that a lot of the stuff that he owns he's bought on credit, which any of you have had credit cards, it's true for you as well. He's the closest that we come in these chapters, aside from the criminals, the outright grubby criminals, and aside from George Vavasour, because who knows who he is. But most of the characters here are extremely wealthy and idle. What did you think of that? And also, in these chapters, we get our first introduction to politics. It was largely absent from the first 20 chapters of what is going to be a predominantly political series of books. What did you think of that? Did it bore you? Was Trollope able to make you interested in it, even though the shape and woof of the politics of his day have long since vanished? I'm curious to know if you're still sticking with this. In fact, if you like it more than you did in the first 20 chapters. So by all means, flood me with comments in the comments field, in text and emails. And I just want to go over what we're going to do next. But at the end of these 20 chapters, we have come to the end of the first volume of Can You Forgive Her? Now we start volume 2. This was knocked down to a 2-volume publication when it came out in book form. So we only have 2 volumes. So we're going to do the second volume in 2 stretches, and then we'll be done. Not only with April, but with Can You Forgive Her? So our next reading is going to start with a chapter called A Noble Lord Dies, and go all the way to the chapter Alice Vavasour's name gets into the money market. We'll get to work reading those, and we'll talk about those next Sunday. And I'll wrap this up for now. This is hideously long, and that's what happens when I start talking about Trollope. I'll try and control that next time, and I'll see you soon. Thank you, Book 2.